All right, good morning, or not good morning, good afternoon, Dad.
Good afternoon.
So we had some technical difficulties. We recorded a conversation this morning, but we lost it. So let's try doing this again.
Okay.
I'll just start us off by saying, yeah, yesterday I was kind of walking around feeling I felt weird. I felt just because all this rhetoric coming from Trump saying that unconditional surrender for Iran, telling the people of Tehran to evacuate, then him posting this text message from Mike Huckabee that's saying, Trump, you survived that assassination. God told you to do this. God told you to start World War III with Iran. It just felt like, oh my goodness, here we go. It's happening. The B 2 bombers are going to be loaded and they're going to start striking Tehran, and then this everything's going to go to hell. But then it kind of stopped, and now I don't feel as apprehensive as I did yesterday. But I think this is just a temporary lull. How are you
Yeah.
feeling?
Yeah. Well, I've certainly experienced a lot of anxiety over the last few days. This is a very scary situation, and it's a little bit hard, not to be affected emotionally by it. I am affected by it. It does truly worry me, and um, I think you're right that this is a lull, but it's very temporary. There's no reason to think that we're out of the woods. I think that it's more likely than not that the U.S. will intervene. That Trump will make the decision to go ahead. It seems that he's pulled back, from the edge of the abyss for the moment. But I have no confidence that he'll hold the line. He may for a while, for some days, but I think eventually he'll cave in.
Why do you think he'll cave in? Why the pause? Is it a pause, or is he just preparing for a strike?
Well, it has to be said there is real opposition, within his own base, within his own movement. People who have been, longtime supporters of his, very important people like Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon are dead set against this. Marjorie Taylor Greene is another. They've spoken very, very loudly in condemnation of of involvement, of this decision that he seems to be about to take to become directly, overtly involved in attacking Iran. And it does go against, what he's been saying really ever since 2016 and earlier, that no more Middle East wars. He The first time that I noticed him was actually back in 2016 when he condemned the other Republican candidates for their support for the Iraq War. And I say, oh, this is a different flavor of Republican here. This is interesting. And then I thought, well, that probably will torpedo his chances. But no, it showed that people responded well to that. Clearly there was a lot of sentiment, among, on the right side of the spectrum within the US that was anti-war, anti-interventionist. And he tapped into that. And that's one of the reasons, it's by far from the only reason, but one of the reasons that he is president now. And I think with Trump, for as I said many times, he is really ignorant about all kinds of things, especially geopolitics. He doesn't understand other countries, and that unfortunately is very true. And we've seen the consequences of that. And it's maybe one of the reasons that he's made the mistake of supporting the Israeli attack. But one thing that he does understand is domestic politics, especially his base, what got him elected. And so he may be having second thoughts about this. I've heard that there was a National Security Council meeting in which opposition to uh, direct U.S. intervention was voiced. So there is opposition within his administration at the top levels of his administration, but there's also clearly opposition from his base. And I think too that he has had. Maybe I'm giving the guy too much credit, but I think he was sincere. Like when he criticized um, the previous misadventures of the U.S. in the Middle East, and here he is, though he's poised to do it again, right? And so he has to have. There must be a part of him, I'm assuming, that is reluctant, is hesitating, is responding to this pressure from below and around him. But again, I have no confidence that he'll hold the line. He has too many Israeli Israel firsters and around him, that he himself appointed, and the deep state, that faction that's always been there, always been pushing for war with Iran. They're there. They've had his ear. They got him into this, at least, partially involved at this point. And I think eventually they're going to convince him to become fully involved. It may not be right away. We may be okay for some days, though there are rumors that he's already given the Iranians a 24-hour deadline, which they're not going to meet. We may see this happen very soon.
What does that mean? A 24-hour deadline? He said so much stuff recently. He said unconditional surrender. Everybody leave Tehran. Like, what does he mean? What did anything Trump says mean?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, the rumor anyway is that they need to surrender basically within 24 hours, and that's just not going to happen. The Iranians have made it clear they're not going to surrender.
So that came out today. So we got what?
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? It's just like these rumors are flying. Trump is saying one thing and then the other. It's crazy. It's amazing too that like the fate of a nation, the fate of much of the world is being decided by this man who seems to be utterly incapable of actually sticking to a position for more than 24 hours. He flip flops. He says one thing, then contradicts himself, 2 hours later. Who knows? But right now, he seems to, though he may be reluctant and hesitating, it seems like the Israel firsters got to him, right? I mean, he's done this. He's gone this far. And I think they basically have him by the proverbial balls right now. I don't think he's going to be able to get out of it, because the thing is now, if things start to go badly for Israel, and I think that's quite possible, over the next few days and certainly weeks, the pressure for him to save Israel is going to be just overwhelming. And I don't think he can resist it. I don't think, even if he wanted to, I'm not clear that he would want to resist it. He has been an extreme Zionist all his life. And so I think if it looks like Israel's existence is on the line, certainly will intervene, but even something well short of that, if Israel is suffering serious damage, and they already have suffered significant damage, but if it goes much further, I think the pressure to do that, the pressure to act forcefully, to intervene directly, will be overwhelming, and that he'll do it.
Can Israel even be saved?
Well, by American intervention, well, it's possible. It's, the U.S. does have a lot of firepower. Iranian air defense has been degraded to, I think, a significant degree. We don't know how much. You listen to some of the Israelis, and it's been utterly wiped out. But clearly that's not true. Iranian air defense is still engaging Israeli missiles over Tehran, but I think there's no question that it's not. The system has been degraded, and we just don't know how far. So if it's, we have a degraded air defense system, we have a very powerful Air Force. There's no question that the U.S. could do a great deal of damage to Iran. But does the U.S. really have the stomach, first of all, to start bombing Tehran? They say their focus. They've declared this a limited scope, and that's to go after the nuclear facilities. It's questionable that they can even achieve their objective there. So are they going to do that, fail, and then just call it quits? It just doesn't seem likely. You get involved in these things. War has a logic all of its own, and it's going to, the likelihood is that we'll be pulled in farther, and we'll start bombing more targets, rather than saying, oops, that's a mistake, as we see again and again in a war. You don't just admit your mistake and go home. No, you double down. You find yourself in a position where, well, if I call it quits now, I'll be humiliated. The only thing to do is to go forward. And I think that's what the U.S. will do, especially given the fact that Iran may very well, probably will retaliate in a significant way if we do send the bombers over Iran. Regardless of what kind of damage they do, they've said that they're going to strike back, and there are a lot of very easy targets within range of Iran, American targets. So again, I think the moment that we go in there, it's going to be bad. Now, I guess it's possible. We can't say that it's impossible. It's possible that Iran will collapse. It'll experience some kind of political collapse. We don't see any signs of that happening here, so far. We did see it happen in Syria, of course. It's a different story, which I think we should know well. But we just can't say it's impossible. So that, maybe the U.S. and Israel could achieve victory. I think it unlikely. Certainly the U.S. can do a great deal of damage. But how does that actually, that's not victory, that's, we do a great deal of damage. At what point do we stop when we realize that, this government is not going anywhere, and the people have rallied around it and they're fighting and they're ready to fight for as long as it takes? What are we going to do? At some point we may find, as we've found in past misadventures overseas, that we say, because it's not existential for us, we just say, this is stupid. We call it quits and we leave, as we did in Vietnam and in Afghanistan. It could very well happen in Iran, but it would be after a great deal of loss of life, mostly Iranian life, but a certain amount of American life, and a lot of, and after very serious damage to the U.S. reputation.
Yeah, but as long as Iran continues to strike Israel, then Israel will keep us in the fight, right? There's no way we could walk away and say this is stupid if Israel is still being subjected to drone attacks or missile attacks, right? Do you see any way that this would let up?
Well, what the Iranians themselves have said is that, okay, if Israel halts its attacks, we're willing to halt our attacks. But we're going to, as long as Israel strikes us, we're going to strike back in a proportionate way. And that's what they've done so far. And I think we have no reason to doubt them. So Israel would have to end it. Now, if this is the problem here. We're joined at the hip with Israel, as John Mearsheimer likes to say. And now this is not existential for us, which is again a reason why we should not get involved. But we are getting involved. It is existential for Israel. They've made it existential for themselves. And the problem is, though we may decide this is stupid eventually, after, really trying to destroy Iran and, force a surrender, and then finding out, the cost of doing this is just too high, then we may decide to leave, as we did Vietnam and Afghanistan again. We could decide to do that. But the problem is Israel is unlikely to let us go so easily, and all its supporters within the U.S. That's what makes this conflict different from others. This is the first time that we've always supported Israel, but we kept a certain amount of distance, right? We didn't actually, we have been involved in previous attacks, but more in a support role. And at this time, we are fighting alongside them. All the world will see, and especially the Middle East will see, that here it is. Here they are, the U.S. and Israel, they're one and the same. And it will, there's plenty of hatred against the U.S. right now, but this will only increase it. And again, it just makes it makes it well nigh impossible for us to walk away from it. I can't say it's impossible, but it's going to be a lot messier. It's going to be harder, just because of our very deep and emotional and our multi-layered relationship with Israel. Previous administrations had the sense, let's not cross this line. There has, again, as I said many times, there's been lots of pressure in the past to do what we're doing now, but we've always held back, I think, because we were aware of the consequences. Now we've done it. We're there, It's already very difficult to pull out, and then if we go in farther, it's going to be even more difficult to pull out. And
Is it even
so, yeah.
possible to pull out now? I mean,
Well,
just
yeah, it's possible. I mean, it's possible, and I think that we can hope against hope, but I just don't think it likely. Again,
but Israel's getting hit. I mean, Israel's
yeah,
getting pounded. They're in trouble, right? I mean, I, it's hard to know what's happening in the fog of war because both Israel and
right,
Iran have really been locking down on videos and
right.
images coming out. But from my understanding, from what it seems to be true, is that Iran, instead of being weakened and having this, Trump tweeting, we have complete control over the skies of Tehran, it feels like Iran is starting to reconstitute itself more. That they are continuing up with the level, continuing with their strikes, and that they are getting through more successfully now. And their air defenses, although, like you said, were damaged, they don't seem to be continuing to damage. They seem to be coming back online a bit. Is that your assessment?
It's well, like you say, it's very hard to say. I do see videos. What I can say for sure is that or Israel has sustained some real damage, very serious damage, and in a way that we've never seen them sustain before. Iran demonstrates that they do have very sophisticated missiles. I think they demonstrated that earlier, but there was, it was kind of easy to deny it because they purposely avoided hitting, cities, and they made their strikes out at the Negevim air base, far away from population centers, and where there was nobody to take the pictures. But now we're seeing it. This is the first time we know that they have the weapons. These are powerful missiles. They're very sophisticated missiles. They're able to penetrate Israeli air defenses. There's no question about it. Now, at the same time, we know that there is a lot of damage being done in Israel, especially during the initial surprise attack. But that damage continues. The assassinations continue. How much damage is being done on both sides? It's really hard to quantify. I don't know. One thing is the number of missiles being fired at Israel from Iran has decreased significantly from the first day or so, and that may be part of the Iranian plan. Especially in the beginning, they simply wanted to saturate their defenses. They used what I've heard is that they actually used a lot of decoy missiles just to draw the fire of these various interceptors and maybe kind of help to determine their positions, the positions of the launchers. That's okay. That's kind of a positive interpretation from the Iranian point of view. But the other possibility is that Iran's launch capability has been seriously degraded. This is something that the Israelis are claiming, that they've taken out a lot of their launchers. And, though Iran has thousands of missiles, they only have a couple hundred launchers, and they've taken out more than half of them already, or even more than that. I just don't know. I don't know. We'll have to see. But there are problems. There may be some real challenges faced on the Iranian side, but there's no question that the Israelis are facing serious challenges too. I think it was the Wall Street Journal? I'm trying to remember exactly, but it was a Western publication. Yeah, I'm not quite sure if it was, or the Wall Street Journal actually came out with another story. But anyway, it was reported that Israel will be out of interceptors in 10 to 12 days. So after that, they can't intercept any. There obviously quite a few are getting through now, but they won't be able to intercept any. And I think, yeah, maybe it was the Wall Street Journal that has a story on the Arrow interceptors in particular. What Israel has is they have, let's say, 3-4 different systems to protect themselves from missile and rocket attacks. And the highest level, the one is the Arrow 3 that actually extends into the beyond the atmosphere. And it's for, some of these ballistic missiles that Iran is sending they do go out of the atmosphere, like the THAAD missiles that the U.S. has supplied Israel. So the Arrow 3 deals with that. And then there's the Arrow 2, which is slightly within the atmosphere, but still a high altitude. Under that is the David Sling. And then at the very bottom is the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome is actually not relevant to what's going on here at all, because that's actually just for very primitive, Katyusha rockets and low technology missiles fired from Lebanon or from Gaza. Um, it's mainly the Arrow 3s. And apparently, those are very expensive interceptors. And the Israelis, according to the Wall Street Journal, are facing a critical shortage of them. And the thing is, these are irreplaceable. Basically, they're very difficult to manufacture. They're very expensive. The THAADs cost, I hear, $12 million a piece.
Per missile?
Yeah,
And
right.
are we shooting two at once,
Yeah,
or?
usually. Well, actually, there was recently. See, the Iranians have fired some of their more advanced missiles recently. There was one, I think it's called the Fatah 1, and it's one that they hadn't fired. A hypersonic. I don't know if it's true hypersonic or we'll call it quasi hypersonic. There's a debate over that. Um, but this is according to the Middle East Spectator. I haven't seen it anywhere else, but according to the Middle East Spectator, they said that, they provided the video footage. 12 interceptors were fired at this, and none of them hit the target. The Fatah 1 actually struck Israel. 12. So if you're talking about, okay, these are interceptors. If you're talking about THAAD, that's $12 million a piece. If you're talking about Arrow, it's, I don't know how many it is, but it's millions of dollars a piece. And apparently, one of these Fatah 1s, that's the most expensive, or one of the most expensive that Iran has, costs $200,000 a piece. So again, in the long run, if Iran can retain its launch capability, you just see that the long run favors Iran.
Yeah, I mean, when you say that they'll run out of interceptors in 10 to 12 days, or I mean, you said Israel will, but does that mean the collective West is? Because, like we said before, it's not just Israel doing it. We're talking about the THAAD system. That's
Right,
a U.S.
right,
system, 12 million a
yeah,
pop for
right,
that. The Patriot interceptors are like 2-3 million a pop, and who knows how many THAADs we make? I know we only make 550 Patriot missiles
right.
a
Yeah, well,
year.
with THAADs, it's about 60 a year. Yeah, so
Okay,
right.
and
So,
so
and then there's the SM3s, and that's about the same. I had heard actually 30 a year for SM3s, but the more recent figures show about 60 a year. And
I don't
those are
know.
the ones that are fired from the ships, and they're part of this defensive system. I talked about the Israeli system, the different layers, but remember, Israel's also being protected by the U.S., both by, ship launch missiles, by the ground launch THAADs, the Patriots. The Patriots apparently haven't done anything because the Israelis seem to regard them as junk. And then, but then also air launch missiles by the U.S. Air Force, the French, fired from, yeah, French French jets, British jets, Jordanian jets, they're all part of it. And still these missiles are getting through. And then the thing is, we've talked again about the shortage of interceptors within Israel, but it is a worldwide shortage. We've talked about that in relation to Ukraine. And the stockpiles have been depleted severely in Europe, in the US. The production capacity is very limited. So this is a war that the whole, even if the West rallies behind Israel, as they are, they're supplying Israel with all kinds of things, their ability to support Israel is limited. It clearly is. We've seen that in Ukraine, and now it'll become even more obvious here in Israel. And by the way, the diversion of all these air defense assets from Ukraine to Israel is already causing a real crisis within Ukraine.
I think you give Israel and the United States too much credit when it comes to, like, is there a chance that they could come out? Could they enact regime
Yeah,
change, or can they all? I mean, just when you tell me this, though,
yeah.
it's just I I don't care how many tanks that the United States has. I don't care how many aircraft carriers that they have. I don't care how much money we spend on our military. At the end of the day, in modern warfare, what we need to look at are missiles and air defense, drone. We need to look at production capacity. And the fact that this is something that we talked about before is that I was thinking that maybe one thing that could potentially save us from the death throes of U.S. Primacy, the death throes as it's going out, it's going to start flailing around, is that it's going to try to turn on its big war machine and we're going to find out it's just going to sputter and die. And
Yeah.
that might be really what happens. Okay, yeah, we're moving a lot of big assets, but does that really matter? Like if aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf, well, if you use them, we know that Iran can sink them. They have ship killing missiles from the Chinese that are provided there. And what we've seen from Ukraine, what we've learned is that it's a war of attrition. We saw what happened with the Houthis, how many billions of dollars the United States spent, and they couldn't even affect any real change in a third world country, the poorest country in the Arab world. So it's so ludicrous. And then I just see the war propaganda just pumping out so much. And it scares me because I see it and it looks like it's winning. And I'm happy to see this pushback. And thank you to everybody that likes all of those little comments to go against those warmongers, those Zionists that are trying to draw us into this awful war. We need to speak out and support all those people. Jackson Hinkle is ratioing all of these Zionist warmongers, and I love to see it. I think we really need to keep that up. But I just don't. I think even if we did get dragged in and the warmongers get their way, there's just these hard realities that we will try. We may try. Maybe we're able to do some aerial bombardments. I mean, basically, that's all I think the U.S. can do. If it can't do that,
Yeah.
what are you going to do? A ground invasion? No
Right.
way. It's
Right.
not
We're
going to
not going
happen.
to do it. Yeah. I don't see that happening. Again, Trump may be talked into this by people who are telling them this will be short and sweet. We'll send in a few B2s, they'll take them out, and then they'll go home, and that's it. Everybody will be happy. Everybody loves a short and sweet air war. You'll be a hero. But that's not the way it's going to be. Even if it is a relatively successful raid and no B2s are shot down, Iran can retaliate, and they can retaliate very easily. We know that. They're all those very vulnerable targets within the region, with an easy reach of even short range and mid range Iranian missiles that they haven't even used yet. Yeah, it would be an air war. That's all we could do. There's not going to be a ground invasion. Now, again, we could cause a lot of misery and death in Iran, but it's I think, as I said in a previous program, it's close to impossible to really win an air war. It's just that you really need to have forces on the ground. Now, I can think of one air war that we won, and you could say was in Serbia. But Serbia is a much smaller country, and it was going against all of NATO. It was even there. It took 2 months, and then they surrendered. But it's for Serbia, it also wasn't quite the kind of the existential struggle that it is for Iran. So I guess you could look at Serbia even so and say, well, maybe we could force a surrender. Maybe we could cause. I don't see these things, but I just have to admit that there's always a possibility. Sometimes we can become so fixated on our own hopes, and we can become so dismissive of what the other side says that we don't really entertain the possibility that the other side could win. I don't think they can win, but they're again, we were surprised by that. Of course, by that surprise attack and the effectiveness of it. And maybe there are other tricks up their sleeves. Maybe there are weaknesses in the Iranian society that we're not aware of. But yeah, in general, I agree that this is not going to succeed. It could just, again, cause a lot of misery and death, but Iran will be still standing. And if finally the U.S. gives up, it's going to be hard to, but I think in the end, it will have to give up, even, in spite of its entanglement with Israel. It'll just have to give up. It will, you say, okay, yeah, Iran really suffered, but what did you achieve, the U.S.? What did you achieve, Israel? What have you done? What is it? The whole world will see that, that these aggressors, succeeded in causing a lot of misery and death, but that's about it.
Right. Would you say it's fair to say that what has been set in motion right now will ultimately lead to the collapse of Israel and the empire, right? That is what we're looking at. That is the significance. There's no putting that genie back in the bottle now, right? Israel
Yeah,
can't stop now. We went through and just said that as this progresses, is the United States will cannot let Israel collapse. Donald Trump won't let that happen. You know, the Zionist machine will do everything in its power to push for this, and it seems like it just can't happen, right? So
yeah.
this is happening. This is
Well,
explain what's
yeah,
happening,
yeah, yeah,
what's going on.
yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know that. I don't think we're going to see, unfortunately, the true collapse of the American empire. Like when this is all over, I may be wrong. It depends on how bad this gets and how long it goes. But there's no question that it's again accelerated all the trends that we've been talking about, and it's done quite a bit to shine a light on this very um, dark relationship, let's say, between the U.S. and Israel. It's really it's there has been an increasing awareness of our entanglement, let's say, with Israel over the past, ever since, in particular, ever since October 7th. But this is just only going to accelerate that. Um, Now, all the people that sponsored this war and supported it, they're not going to disappear overnight. They're still going to be there. But yeah, I think they're going to be weakened. I mean, this would be a huge failure. This will be a huge failure for Israel if as I expect, they do not succeed in their objectives. Iran is still standing when it's all over, and it will be it will be sort of um, an emperor has no clothes moment. There has been this myth of Israeli invincibility, and it's something that has been really important to the identity of Israel, both within Israel and back here in the U.S. I think that myth really took off in 1967 with the Six-Day War, and it's been building up ever since. And this could be the end of that myth. It wouldn't be the end of Zionism, the end of Israel, but it would be one of the pillars that has been supporting Israel, and Zionism will collapse, I believe, when this is all over.
Yeah, it's hard for me to see Israel still standing as it is because I mean it's still engaged in this genocide in Gaza. It still holds parts of Syria. It holds parts of Lebanon. Once as it gets weakened and it gets damaged more and more, I don't see them being able to continue what they're doing. And you said, for example, that Iran would stop firing missiles into Israel if Israel stopped its attacks as well. Um, I, do you think that's really true that Iran that they could just stop at this point because we're seeing Israel just still slaughter the people in Gaza?
Yeah.
I think there is so much almost like a cathartic feeling when Iran finally struck back. Everybody was just like, yes, finally, Israel's getting a taste of its own medicine for everything they've done to the Palestinians, to Gaza, and I think it'll just I think there's just so much public support behind what Iran's doing around the world that they should only stop to say like you have to stop killing the people in Gaza. I mean that's what this really comes back to. We need this is what kicked everything off to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't address that root problem, then it's going to continue, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it has to be pointed out, again, that we're all focused on what's happening in Tehran and in Tel Aviv right now for obvious reasons, for very good reasons. But the carnage in in Gaza has not slowed down. It was just within the last 24 hours that 59 civilians were massacred. Hungry civilians that were hoping to get some sort of food were massacred while waiting for that food shipment to arrive. And the IDF hasn't even, pretended like, oh, they were Hamas or anything. They just say that, well, they were in the wrong place. Like we had zoned that for combat and they were supposed to be over here. So we fired our tank shells at them and killed 59 of them, injured hundreds of them. This is something that, again, this would be big news, but because it's all overshadowed, it has to be remembered that it continues. The carnage continues. The starvation continues. Um, so, yeah, I mean, it just seems to me, that there has to be some sort of breaking point where the world, it just says enough is enough. It hasn't happened so far. I mean, it's kind of it's amazing that again we have basically just the Houthis and then indirectly the Iranians acting against it. Really opposing Israel, but the rest of the world it hasn't. There are the countries that really can do something about it. And the number one country, of course, is the U.S. And but then following the U.S., we'll just say is the Western Europe collectively, because they do supply a lot of arms to Israel, but not nearly as much as the U.S. And the U.S., if the U.S. said no, I think Europe would say no. The U.S. could again end this, could end the Iran war, it could end, the attack on Gaza, the genocide in Gaza. It could end it almost immediately. So this is the one country that can make a difference. But then there are other countries just around Israel, like Turkey, that can make a real difference. And Turkey is supposed to be a brother nation, right? It's supposed to be a Muslim nation. Why aren't they? They're Sunni Muslim, and so are the Gazans. They're Sunni Muslims by and large. And why aren't they supporting them? They haven't. Now, other countries are far away. I say, well, maybe either the Russians should do more or the Chinese should do more. Yeah, there's a problem though with they have that military power, but they can't. If they intervene directly, then you have a risk of World War III, and that's the problem that we're looking at too in the case of Iran. Now, but I think there's no question that both the Russians and the Chinese are going to provide very vital support to Iran. And then it also has to be remembered that Iran hasn't asked for any other country to intervene on their behalf. But we know that Iran has been meeting with both Russian and Chinese representatives, high-level meetings. We're talking about foreign ministers and heads of state. And I'm sure they always understood that this could happen, and they made arrangements. Now we're already seeing on the Chinese side that deliveries are being made. There are reports of military transport aircraft flying into Tehran from China, and then it should also be remembered that there is now a rail link between China and Iran that actually went into operation just a couple of weeks ago. But that's a way that China can support Iran, very directly. We've gone away from I know the original question was about the genocide. The countries that can make a difference aren't doing it. Other countries, it's more difficult for them to do something, especially in the case of, Gaza and Palestine in general. But when it comes to Iran, we have two superpowers, Russia and China, that can make a difference. And, even though they will not intervene directly, they're not going to send their own, pilots and aircraft there. I don't see that happening unless who knows, this gets just too crazy. They can do a lot to keep Iran in the fight and keep them standing.
Yeah, I mean, you say that Russia and China, they don't want to intervene around militarily. I understand causing greater conflict, but the problem is that's basically all the United States does, right? We're constantly going around, and it takes people need to stand up to it. I mean, that's what Iran's doing. So I think, don't you think these other powers are realizing that it's time to stand up? I mean, they are, and that this
Right.
is the end. I know they have to calculate it carefully.
Right. Well, I think they're moving. They are moving in that direction. Let's just put it that way. It wasn't too long ago. Let's say it was actually back. When was the JCPOA finalized? I think it was 2015, and it was around that time that actually UN sanctions were imposed on Iran. Just prior to that, it was part of the whole process. The pressure that the Western powers were putting on Iran to bring him to the negotiating table, and so on and so forth. Well, back then, Russia and China voted to impose those sanctions. Now, it must be pointed out that both of them did quite a bit to water down the sanctions. The U.S. and France and Great Britain, they wanted to impose even harsher sanctions, and the Chinese and the Russians got them to soften them. But still, they went along with it. That was back in, I think, approximately 2015. Um, they've gone a long way since then. I think it has to be said, and I think all of us should remember, all of us who believe in BRICS and kind of the resistance to the empire, to the U.S.-led global hegemony, all of us who are part of that, let's say, movement or community. I think we all have to really show our respect to Iran, because Iran was in a sense a pioneer, the first one, and there was a time when Iran stood by itself. It really didn't have any clear friends in the world, powerful friends anyway. And they withstood all these incredible pressures and survived years of sanctions. And, the war that was launched against them with U.S. support by Iraq and so on and so forth. And they were still standing after all that time. And it's only just over time that actually, I think, let's say the Iranians and the Russians have long been sympathetic, but they were also, reluctant to offend the West. They still wanted to maintain good relations with the West. So they were careful not to get too close to Iran. That's over. Those days are gone. They're okay. They have made it crystal clear we stand with Iran. It's like they've learned their lesson. It's just that, this power is, it's not about Iran. It is about this mad dream of global hegemony that the West has, and that anybody who risks is going to be attacked in the most vicious and comprehensive way. The Russians have learned it. The Chinese are learning it right now. And they've all kind of come, it's not like they cut their relations with Iran, but it's after suffering their own, being the victim of sanctions and everything else. I think they picked up the phone and called the Iranians and said, "Okay, now we understand. We're with you." So now, things have changed, and to the benefit of Iran, and that may really make the difference. Maybe if Iran's going to survive and and still be standing at the end of this, and I believe they will, they're going to. It'll be in no small part due to the support that they receive from China and Russia, something that they didn't have before.
I want to move a little bit more towards what's happening here domestically with regard to this war with Iran. I think you told me that it's only 11% of Americans support war with Iran. But if we take a look at our politicians, we have an overwhelming majority that seem to want it. There are a few voices that are really pushing for it. But I think the cat's out of the bag for the American people to understand that there is something seriously wrong with the United States and its relationship with Israel. And the longer this goes on, the more and more apparent it's going to be. I mean, we just saw Ted Cruz. I'm sure you saw that clip. Yeah. Where Tucker Carlson was talking about, okay, well, what's the population around? It's not important. It's like, well, you want to invade a country and you overthrow the government. You don't know anything about this country. Right. And then he uses the term like, well, we're going to strike them. It's like, we are. I thought you were saying Israel's going to do. It just shows you who they are. When they say we, they are speaking on behalf of Israel, not the American people. And so it's starting to break through. People are like, what is going on here? And then we had that incredible statement from Donald Trump when he said, your own director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, said that your intelligence agencies have not found any sign that Iran is trying to pursue a nuclear weapon. I don't care what she says. I don't care what my national intelligence. Right. I have Israeli intelligence. That's
I don't think
he's not. Of course, he's not saying that. I added that. Okay, yeah, but that's what's being insinuated here, and that's got to be what's coming here. Like, who wants this attack? It's Israel. It's Netanyahu. So you saying you got some special intelligence? Where did that come from? It came from the Zionists. It came from Netanyahu, Mossad, the global hegemonists, whatever it is. It's not from even our own national intelligence, which is already pretty full of Zionists and neocons as is. But so that's insane. That's insane that our president won't take orders from his own director of national intelligence. Not orders. I mean,
take advice.
Take advice from the DNI.
Right. Yeah. No, that's extraordinary. I mean, that was just quite an extraordinary statement by Trump. amazing. I mean, that's the whole job of the DNI is right to present like what the consensus view of the intelligence communities to the president, and he's just going to ignore it. It's extraordinary. And yeah, though he didn't say no, I'm just listening to the Israelis. It seems to be the logical conclusion. You got to ask yourself, well, who are you listening to? If you won't listen to your own intelligence agencies, who are you listening to? And I think you're right. It's probably directly from Netanyahu and the Israelis, but also all those Israel firsters within his own administration and the deep state, who are right, who are just lying to him, because it's just well known. It's not just that this is under Tulsi Gabbard that we've had this finding. This has been the consistent finding of the intelligence agencies, the U.S. intelligence agencies, for well over 20 years now. And you just say, why do we even have intelligence agencies if we have a president like this? It's really frightening. It would be funny if it wasn't so, if the consequences of this weren't so horrific. So yeah, there's that, and then you mentioned that poll. It showed that, I think it was a YouGov poll, 11% support for intervention, 60% against it. Now the support was stronger. I think it was 23% among Republicans, but many more opposed it. I think 53% among Republicans, did not want us to intervene on Israel's behalf, to become involved in this. So it shows he's not responding to pressure from the people. They never do. It's those mega donors, it's Miriam Edelson. It's all those Iran hawks and Zionists, ultra Zionists that he's appointed, and the ones that have always been there. I mean, that's what's going on. And but as you're right to point out, this is really goes against the interests and the wishes of the common people, of the people that voted for him. And it's you could certainly say that was certainly true, like of the Iraq War. But back then, people were a lot less cynical. I think that's the difference. And, as you've been pointing out, there is this growing awareness of what's going on. It's still, it still isn't nearly as widespread or as it should be. But there is a growing awareness of this unhealthy relationship. It didn't really exist at all. It was just on the fringes, but it's clearly moved beyond that right now. And so there's a growing and I think very healthy cynicism about these kinds of wars. You think about it, it's just sort of like the Iraq War all over again. Remember, weapons of mass destruction. And people really bought it back then. They really believed it. I remember back then, I had my suspicions, but I had too much trust in the government back then. I said, well, they must have some intelligence I'm not aware of or something. Turned out they had nothing. Now, I think all of us, or very many of us anyway, maybe a majority, have grown really quite cynical and skeptical about these claims. You said, I've heard that before. I don't believe this. It's going to be harder for them to pull it off. Maybe they're going to go ahead and do it, but there's just going to be, I think, the support for it. It may increase. There's, especially like if a bomber gets shot down or whatever, we worry about our pilot or something, this happens. But especially if this drags on and it gets ugly, I think people are going to sour on it much more quickly than they soured on the Iraq War.
Right. I mean, we were naive with the Iraq War, and it came out of nowhere. The 9/11 event was massive, a lot of high emotions. But what we have here is we're being sold such an obvious lie. I mean, just
Right.
the gall of the Israelis to think that they can get away with this. It just shows you how little regard they have for our own intelligence and sovereignty as Americans, that they can do this, that they can say, oh, we'll be conducting mass murder in Gaza for years, and America is going to support us no matter what, even though it's damaging our reputation on the world stage. It's just harming us. And then they've been saying that Iran is going to be close to getting a nuclear weapon for 30, 40 years. Netanyahu has been saying this. There's all these clips going out. You said CNN posted one about
Yeah.
it.
Right.
right?
I mentioned in our previous
Our previous
recorded
conversation, right?
the one that, yeah, with the technical
That
problems.
that we
Yeah, I
lost.
think, but that is important to point out. It's just another example, the kind of thing that you haven't seen before. CNN, had some brief episode, where they actually did replay all the clips of Netanyahu saying over the years. They showed him going back to, I think, 1995, but apparently he said it even earlier. Um, yeah, Iran is just 2 years away from a bomb, and he's been saying that like for every 2 years ever since. And they didn't show all the clips, but they showed quite a few. Yeah, that's interesting because again, CNN is not um, um, an outfit that is known for being sympathetic to Iranians, or to be or generally skeptical of Zionist claims. I'm being facetious here, because sarcastic, because they've been very much a part of the establishment. They have trumpeted the Zionist claims. They have trumpeted a lot of the wild accusations directed against Iran. But here they're going the opposite way, and so that's interesting. It shows, I think, again, there is a skepticism and cynicism that didn't exist before. I'm afraid it's not going to prevent them from doing the dirty deed and actually becoming directly and overtly involved. But I think that like the support for it is going to be very limited, and it's going to fall away quickly. And that's the silver lining to this whole thing. It's just that Israel and their supporters within the U.S. have taken this too far, and it's beginning to show. It's just like people have
Right.
lost patience with this.
Yeah, I mean, if you just do a little bit of bare minimum research on this conflict, it's hard to come to any other conclusion than Israel's the aggressor here.
Yeah,
And they are doing this with the complete plan of just drawing the United States into the conflict because they know they can't do it themselves. And it's
yeah,
amazing that they did this massive punch that was coordinated with the United States while Trump is supposed to be negotiating with Iran on getting a peace deal, a nuclear deal. They
right.
used that as a ruse. They used the IAEA as a ruse. The whole
Yeah,
thing was just this setup to do this sucker punch, and then within 24 hours of their massive, decapitation attack, they're coming begging America for help, just showing how pathetically weak Israel is.
yeah.
And it's
Well,
just
right. Well, again, if anybody has been following this closely, as we have, none of this part of it is not a surprise. I was surprised by what Israel did, and the extent of their penetration of Iranian society. But we're not surprised for this. We've been talking about this, and many others have been talking about this for a long time, about what Israel is up to. This is all about getting the U.S. involved. And it's just like it only went 2 days or so, before they began begging for the U.S. to become
right. They
involved.
did it so quickly. So
Right.
that's what I'm just saying that, and then we're seeing this craziness coming out of our political elite, and a lot of our billionaires are saying, "Oh, we can just see, like, why is everybody just turned on a switch and they're just pumping out war propaganda? Oh, they're about to nuke Israel. They're going to nuke the United States. We got to just drop bombs on them now. No questions asked."
Yeah.
And everybody, normal person that isn't paid off by APAC or
Mhm.
an evangelical Zionist or whatever, is just like, what the hell is this? And it's
Yeah.
just so clear. That just means that the jig is up. And so, what does that mean to American society?
Right.
As it becomes more and more apparent to the majority of Americans that Israel is controlling and using America in so many ways, there's got to be a lot of hatred, and we're talking about it's just going to get worse because people are going to
Yeah.
have so many questions after this. If the United States continues to get further involved, questions are going to get asked, especially as
Yeah.
gas prices start to shoot up, Strait of Hormuz gets closed, China gets more involved, Pakistan gets more involved. The whole thing's just going to, and people are going to ask questions. If we don't, if we Trump just pulls back and says, "Oh, okay, no, everything's settled." Okay, first of all, I don't think Iran is going to stop hitting Israel, and I don't think Israel can stop. Netanyahu's in too far. His political career is at stake. He's going to keep it
Hmm.
going. So, but even if we did, people will be like, "What the hell was that about, Trump?
Yeah. Right.
What's going
Yeah.
on here?" And then people will start to uncover. I think it's a matter of time before Joe Rogan gets Tucker Carlson, or not Tucker Carlson. Joe Rogan gets Tulsi Gabbard on his podcast. They're good friends, and she's going to
Yeah.
be like, what
Yeah.
happened here that he doesn't listen to?
Right.
Who's he listening to?
Right.
It's going to come out. He's already talked to people like Ian Carroll. That is mainstream consciousness now. It's and even
Mm,
mainstream media like CNN, they're starting to break through. I saw,
mm,
what was it, Jon Stewart did the same thing. Did a great job making fun of Netanyahu constantly making this claim. Just
mm.
we're laughing at it. We're laughing
Right.
at just how stupid this is, that we
Right.
would fall for this. So it's not
Right.
going to work. So what does that mean for the U.S. society if we
Yeah.
when we
Well,
come
at
to
first, it shows that. Again, I'll just point to the contrast. I remember back those days in 2002, 2003. Um, in the build up to the Iraq War, and all these scary stories about they've got weapons of mass destruction. It could be mushroom clouds and in Peoria and all that. And people believed it. They swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. People were scared. They trusted their government. George W. Bush had a plan and we had to stand behind him. I mean, for a while, I think he had a 90%, maybe it wasn't 90%, but it was amazingly high approval rating. Um, and it's just different this time, because we're hearing a lot of the same talk and people are making fun of it. There's still, some people, I suppose, still believe in it, but I don't even think, I kind of suspect that a lot of those people who are going along with the story know that it's phony. They're just interested in regime change and they understand this whole thing's an excuse. The whole thing is just so transparent. So it's different this time. And what does it mean for American society? Well, eventually, I think all I could say, I don't know how it's going to play out because this is so crazy, and we're talking about these, kind of the American psyche. But we're going to become a bipolar society, or not maybe bipolar, multiple personality, a split personality is maybe what I'm trying to say, because we do have these, I think dead enders, people who, if for whatever reason, some of them are Christian Zionists, but they're just Jewish Zionists and secular Zionists. There are plenty of them who just believe in Israel and then believe in, for them, this is the most important thing of all. And they're not going to, some of them are going to wake up and from the nightmare and realize what they've done, but most of them won't. And they're going to fight to the end. They have a lot of power. But as the rest of us wake up to what's going on, and then you say, like, what have you done? You're going to look at the smoking ruins of Gaza. It's just sort of like a wake up and, you see that, like, realize that your eyes are open to the horror that has been wreaked in our name. Not just in Gaza now and in Lebanon, in Syria, but also in Iran. Many of us are going to turn to our fellow citizens and say, what have you done? And I don't know how it's going to play out, but it's going to be something that could really tear apart American society.
Do you think there's going to be a judgment day in this world for the people, the traitors to this country? Really, I mean, people like Lindsey Graham and Randy Fine, Donald Trump, these people that are taking orders for another nation, not acting in the nation's the interest of the American people.
Right.
Will there be some type of? Will
Yeah.
they have a bill to pay?
Yeah. Well, one again, I think it's important to point out that um, it's not really an exaggeration to say they're taking orders, but it's not like they've just been bought off. They're believers. I think people like that. They have been. They've allowed the Zionism to become part of their own faith, and they do believe in it. But in believing in it, they put the interests of another country. I wouldn't even say the interests, but the objectives, the goals of another country above their own. And yes, then that does make them traitors, even if they're very sincere about their, treachery, their treason, I should say. It makes them traitors. I don't know. Often the powerful, they have a way of, escaping justice. Maybe it, I'm not, I don't care in a way if these people get off scot free, I don't really care. I just want to see it end. I just want to see it end. I want to see them out of power. I don't even mind if Trump, he can retire to to Mar-Lago, and I don't know where Lindsey Graham goes, but his country estate in South Carolina or whatever. Just as long as they don't have any more power and they can't do any more damage, and we just end this madness. That's just all I hope for.
Yeah, well, the good thing is that at least in this country, we can hopefully achieve that because as this conflict keeps on growing and people become more and more aware of the problem, we can vote these people out. People will really be looking at, okay, are you an Israel first or America first? And it's becoming very apparent who is who now.
Mm-hmm.
It's clear as day. If there was any question about it before, now we know.
Mm-hmm.
And so hopefully those will get out of power. But what about Israeli society, though? Because this
Yeah.
is something different, because this is something where you have the vast majority, over 80%, that are all in favor of ethnic cleansing. It's hard to get 80% of people to agree on anything. It's actually impressive that they have such a large majority that are okay with this.
Right.
After World War II, after the Holocaust, we had, the Nuremberg trials, and we were hunting down all the perpetrators of the Holocaust. What will we do for the Holocaust that happened in Gaza? I mean,
Yeah.
this is different because you have a whole population that
Yeah.
were totally on board with it. What happens to them? Do they
Yeah.
have is there something that they just have to change their identity and try to integrate in society somewhere else? I mean, what
Yeah, no,
there
it's a
won't
very
be a
good question. Well,
trial.
that's the dangerous thing is, again, these people have nuclear weapons. The most recent estimate I saw was actually they have 90. I had heard earlier 200. We'll say 90 to 200 nuclear warheads. They have them, and they have people who clearly would be willing to use them. I mean, they're just that kind of people, the kind of people you find in Netanyahu's ruling coalition. So that's the great danger is that if they really think they're going down, Israel is in danger of extinction. Let's say as a state, they may go to that Samson option. That's a possibility. That's a very scary possibility. Now within it's 83%, according to that recent poll, is in favor of fully ethnically cleansing Gaza. 83% of Jewish Israelis. So you'll certainly find something different among the 20% or so that are Arabs. But that is a huge, huge majority. You're right. And I remember this earlier poll that only 2% of Jewish Israelis thought that too much was being done in Gaza, that the attacks were excessive. Only 2% thought that. So this is an entire society, that you could say has blood on its hands. And can they wake up from this? Can they repent? Can they?
I don't think.
Yeah.
Has there ever been a society like that where it's not like in Nazi Germany that people were cheering on and taking tours as the Gazans were being slaughtered,
Yeah. Right.
but I mean, the Germans weren't watching the Jews getting slaughtered. There were a few people that obviously that were in charge of this, but it wasn't just the average German person that's like, yes, this is great. But that's what we're
Mhm.
seeing in Israel. And have we ever seen anything like that? Have we ever seen where just women and children of a society, the old, the young, the schools or the doctors are like, yeah, celebrating when we're killing kids in the neighboring territory.
Yeah, well, I can just think of some horrible wars in the past, especially in the ancient world. Of course, where everyone is put to the sword. But there's no comparison in that we don't have the media that we have. We don't have the immediacy. Usually these wars were fought quite often a great distance from the inhabitants of the country, and many of them didn't fully appreciate, understood. They couldn't view it as it was happening. This is different. This is new. I don't think there's anything that it really can be compared to. Um,
It's such a fascinating the whole story of Israel is both fascinating and horrifying. It's so insane. The whole story of it is just it's unbelievable. I can't believe it's real.
yeah,
That we're in this situation,
yeah,
and now that we were talking about nuclear war because of this ethno-supremacist state that we helped create that's in the middle of engaging a genocide, that has nuclear weapons, that wants to attack another country that doesn't have nuclear weapons. And this country, Israel, is not part of the NPT,
Yeah.
doesn't follow any
Yeah.
laws. It can get away with anything.
Yeah.
It's so weird. But
Right.
that has destroyed the rules-based order. That has
Yeah.
destroyed
Oh,
America
it is
already.
destroying. Yeah.
It's destroyed it irreparably. Like America is done. And I think a lot of people, I think, feel that, but they don't understand it or know how to articulate it. That
Hmm.
like it doesn't feel good to be American anymore. American
Yeah.
stuff is tainted, and
Yeah.
it's tainted in large part because of Israel.
Right. Yeah. No, no, I think there's no, and yeah, our very willing complicity, that's, I think it's true. It's like it's beyond the double standard. It's just that there are no standards for Israel. Um, it's just the hypocrisy is just is unbelievable. It's off the charts. Um, yeah, recently the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, I think it just today came out with a statement on really the need to clean up the IAEA. They pointed out the huge hypocrisy that, they say clearly they were manipulated into making this finding the day before the attack, and it was clearly a coordinated effort, to set up Iran and attack them. And I say, well, look, yeah, the the NPT regime, the non proliferation regime, which is so important to the security of the world, is being manipulated by the West, bent to its own ends. It's, in this case, clearly nefarious ends, and this has to change. They're demanding, look, we need to see some comprehensive reports on the attacks. First of all, these attacks on nuclear facilities in Iran, those are, in direct contravention, again, like of the UN Charter. And it's the sort of thing that the IAEA is supposed to be focused on. And, they haven't actually come out and condemned Israel for it. But Russia was saying, you've got to do this, basically they're trying to save the IAEA and make it a credible organization again. But it's in danger of becoming, just thoroughly discredited by this. And that's IAEA is just part of that so-called rules-based international order that you're talking about. It's so much of it has been corrupted, and it's just like the double standards and hypocrisy that were always there, and bothered certain people, but most people, managed kind of to overlook it. It's just become so blatant, and in this case, it's just so extreme that, yeah, I think it is part of, it. It should be the death knell for the so-called rules-based international order.
Well, let's pray so. Okay, Dad. Well, I think we can end it there unless there's anything else you want to
Uh,
throw in.
well, yeah, I think this is what I said earlier in our previous attempt at a recording, but it's just that let's not forget Gaza and just, or did I say this in this broadcast? I can't remember or not, but
We talked a little bit about it, but yeah, just
yeah, there was a
yeah,
massacre within the last
right.
24 hours of 59. Okay, I think I did mention it,
Yeah, yeah,
but let's just not forget Gaza. I mean, the horror there continues. Yeah, I guess I did. We did talk about that, so we can leave it there.
yeah, yeah. Let's just hope we can navigate this without all going boom.
Yeah,
And
right.
it's crazy to say that. I felt like I've been fear mongering a bit because I'm just looking at the situation and I'm just like, Israel is screwed. Well, if
Mm.
Israel's screwed, then people are going to start looking up the Samson option, because that's what's
Yeah,
there. This
yeah,
is a nuclear weapon then, and they show they don't have any problem, killing non-Jewish life, non-Jewish, human
yeah.
beings on this planet. So it's like, will they do it? And all of their actions so far says that I think they will, and that's just
Um,
so scary. And then but the problem is just once people start getting closer to that point where it's like, oh my God, Israel's in big trouble, and now you
mm,
start to hear about the Samson option, the hatred towards Israel is going to grow even more. Once people realize, hey, you're holding the whole world hostage, this isn't cool.
mhm.
It's so bad. And then just the repercussions from that after the state of Israel dissipates or whatever, breaks it, turns into something else.
Mm-hmm.
Why what's going to happen in the world? Where are they going to go? How are we going to deal with the situation and just realize how crazy this whole experiment was?
Yeah.
you know,
Right. Yeah.
let's
Well,
just
it,
fingers crossed, fingers
yeah.
crossed. No,
Right.
no nukes.
When you're talking about that and all the very frightening outcomes that we're faced with, and you can't really see any sort of happy outcome. I just thought of that recent crash of the Indian Airlines um, jet, the passenger jet, and the incredible story of the one man who survived. And it's just like nobody knows how, but he just found himself lying there surrounded by bodies and burning wreckage, and he just got up and started running away. So it's almost like that's what we're hoping for, that will somehow the world will be that one man, that
Yeah,
somehow survives
yeah,
all this.
yeah. No, it's not like I'm trying to think of some way that this could go nuclear. I'm trying to find a way where this won't,
Yeah.
and it's hard to see it. So I mean,
Yeah.
are we betting on seat 11A? I don't like that. It's
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah, well, there's again, history has twists and turns, and our imaginations never can consider all the possibilities. There may be some. I wouldn't say a happy ending, but a non-apocalyptic ending to this. But it's really
okay.
kind of hard to see, like you're saying.
Okay, well, I'll end with this.
Okay.
Do you think by when we have our conversation on Friday, do you think the United States will have bombed Iran?
I would say it's like 50-50. That's what I'll say. There's a very, very high chance. It's not a certainty, clearly. I,
All
but
right, I'm
it's
saying they are. If you want to
okay.
say no, but 50-50.
Yeah.
I'm saying I think I don't know. I just feel like Trump. Yeah, how are you going to backpedal this one, man? Let's
Yeah.
see. I mean, but if anybody can backpedal, it's
Yeah,
Trump.
exactly.
You know,
Exactly. Right.
it's like
Yeah.
he's good at
Yeah.
that too. But oh man,
Okay.
it's scary. Okay, well, let's end it there, Dad.
Okay.
Okay, stay safe out there, everybody. Okay, take care. Thanks a bunch.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Bye.